Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, services, products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And of course, we're looking for the leadership that's going to help us, that has the planet that will be going to 9 billion people by 2050, and possibly it'll be as many as 12 to 13 billion by the end of the century. And we have a representative of an organization that's very much involved in looking at the future and also to work with youth and the general population as far as how we're going to move forward at the same time to assist the United Nations in New York. This is His Excellency Donald T. Bliss, Ambassador Retired, President and member of the Board of Directors for the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area. We need to start paying for the length of the title on that one, Don.
Right.
And he's been here with us and representing a very outstanding organization, but has been involved in diplomatic service for a number of years. And Don, you've really done a nice job over the years, and I'll continue to call you Mr. Ambassador throughout this, if that's okay with you. But tell us a little bit about the association itself, what it does, and the purpose.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's great to be here with you. The United Nations Association of the National Capital Area is the largest and most active chapter of UNA USA, which is part of the UN Foundation. And we cover Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia. We do dozens of programs every year. We have over 1,000 members, and more than half of whom are under 40 years old. So we're a young, energetic group, present company accepted. And one of our most flagship programs is the Global Classrooms program, Model UN, which you're going to hear about later this evening. And we reach over 3,000 middle and high school students in the area. With a year-long global curriculum on UN-related issues, and the top 600 come to the State Department every year. It'll be April 8th this year for a Model UN, which is the largest outside group ever hosted by the Department of State. So that's one of maybe dozens of programs that we do every year to try to increase public understanding and awareness of the UN.
Well, looking at you and your energy, I've known you now for several years. I'd say you fit right in with the 40 and under, right. So you have a very high energy level, and it takes that in what you're doing, because not only are you working with the local community, which is a very dynamic place. We were talking about all the ambassadors and coming and going every 2 to 3 or 4 years, but also the world really comes into Washington, D.C., but also you're reaching out to the United Nations itself in New York. So, you know, it's multitasking all the time for you. So we know that you're very, very busy. What are some of the special missions of your organization?
Well, we're really 3 missions. One, we're trying to increase public understanding and awareness of what the UN does. You'd mentioned my last opportunity as an ambassador was to represent the United States at the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is a UN specialized agency that most Americans have never heard of. And yet when you fly to a foreign country, you're reasonably confident that your aircraft in the airport you're going to land in meets global safety standards, and that the pilot will be able to communicate with ground control in the same language and efficiently. And in fact, the data shows you're safer on that international aviation trip than you will be going to and from the airport. So for 71 years, ICAO has been maintaining safety and environmental and security standards for international aviation. And this is just one of 17 specialized agencies that work in areas like healthcare, food insecurity, humanitarian relief, meteorology, telecommunications, and so forth, that really give us global standards. And I thought it was really important for Americans to understand better what the UN does and how it's working 24/7 to make this world a safer place and as a global community. And then secondly, we work for constructive U.S. leadership in the United Nations, because the UN was really founded on a vision of the Roosevelt's administration. And for it to work, U.S. leadership is absolutely critical. And so we're not cheerleaders. We want the U.S. to be ensure that the United Nations is as efficient and effective as possible. And finally, we work to prepare the next generation of global citizens, and that's why we start at the middle school level, and we have a young professionals group that's very active, and all the way through to retired people, to engage them in international work in support of what the United Nations does. So it's a 3-pronged mission. First of all, to increase public understanding, including our opinion leaders in Congress and in the press. Secondly, to to promote constructive U.S. leadership, and finally to prepare the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, and looking at the leaders, I know you're very much involved in youth, and we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But also, I think it's equally important because you're reaching to the parents, the families of all these youth that you have, and then in turn reaching into the community. So how do you do that three-step process? You reach the youth, get them very much engaged as far as the Model UN, and then of course the Global Studies program. And then how does that go then to the families or caretakers for the students, and then into the community itself?
Well, one of the things we're really stressing these days is the United Nations took a very bold step this September and established 17 goals for sustainable development, global goals for sustainable development. And we're trying to bring international and local organizations and students together to look at these goals and see how we can all work together to eliminate extreme poverty in the world, to provide for healthy lives, for university quality education. And we do this with some humility because we have many of these challenges here in the United States as well. So we work with the young people to get a better understanding of how we work together as a global community to address these concerns. The young professionals who will be the ones who will carry the torch and get this accomplished over the next 15 years. They're working hard to prepare on these issues, and then we involve the established organizations and the leadership of those organizations, bringing together, sometimes for the first time, international and local organizations to talk about things like hunger and healthcare and conflict mediation, which are problems in our cities as well as in cities around the globe. So we can learn from each other on this.
Well, it's very important, and it's really a two-way street. No matter how small the country is, you look at some of the countries across the South Pacific, maybe even Latin America and Africa, a very small population base and all that. But really, even as the United States and its importance in the world, we need to look at them as, you know, really co-equals as far as how do we solve all these issues, because we're going to have 9 billion people on the planet by 2050 based on all the research and analysis, whether we can actually take care of them or not. So, and that's something I know you're working at. But what are you doing as far as the environment is concerned? Because we're the intersect emerald planet between the environment and the economy.
Well, clearly, the environment is a wonderful example of the kinds of issues we face in the 21st century because they do not respect sovereign borders. Pollution doesn't go through customs, and climate change is a global issue. It can't be solved by the United States alone, but the United States has to be a big contributor to the solution. So we do a lot to increase public awareness of the kinds of issues that can only be resolved through global cooperation. And the UN is the one institution where everybody has a seat at the table. As you say, right. All 194 nations that are members have a seat at the table. So whether it's terrorism, whether it's climate change, whether it's Ebola and health pandemics, whether it's an interconnected global economy, these issues require cooperation, and cooperation through the national institutions that bring people together to resolve issues. And so we've been very actively engaged in looking at, for example, the climate change issues in the Paris COP21 conference, and we're going to have a follow-up in March to look at clean energy alternatives that are affordable to people locally so that we can do our share in bringing about a less carbon-based economy. We see this as a tremendous opportunity for the United States with our innovation and private sector technology to really look at new sources of energy and to be a leader in this effort to try to address the serious issues of climate change. And we're quite happy with the results in Paris because for the first time, almost 200 nations came together and agreed on a framework to address these issues as a serious matter. They pledged to work on these issues together, and there's a lot that has to be done. We don't even have all the technology yet to meet the goals that are needed. But in order to make those steps forward, U.S. leadership has been absolutely critical. And in the end, the UN is most successful where the world leaders come together in that forum and work things out and lead. And that's, I think, what's happened in Paris in December in the COP21 conference.
Yeah, and I think that's very important where you bring together and you're talking about all these nations working together, but you have, you know, the Chinas, the Indias, the Brazils, South Africa, other nations like that really are linchpins within their own regions as well as the United States and its work in NAFTA and all these international bodies. But looking at the United States itself, what do you think about the support it gives to the United Nations and the outcomes that is expected through our participation, having it in New York City as the world headquarters of the UN. How do you think that the United States is taking leadership through that organization?
I think we're inconsistent. I actually think in the last 4 years we've done better. I mean, the President has actually chaired a Security Council meeting, and the Secretary of the Treasury has chaired another one on issues of finance, of terrorism, and so forth. So I think the U.S. is looking for ways to use the UN as an instrument of global cooperation. And as a leader in the UN, we can achieve objectives and results that we can't achieve unilaterally anymore. These issues require global cooperation, and the UN is the instrument through which that can be effectuated. And it can only happen with strong U.S. leadership. So I think we're on an upward curve right now, but what concerns me, for example, about the COP21 conference in Paris is that the success of it was in large measure due to the leadership of the United States and our work with China and with France and so forth. But for it to be successful and to be a staying and sustaining framework, it's going to require continued U.S. leadership, setting the example and working with other nations, providing the technologies to bring about the results we need. And so we need consistency in U.S. leadership. I think we're on the upswing. I hope we stay on the upswing.
And we need to do that. And I think what you're doing as far as the youth is concerned, and again, having their support network with their families and then reaching the communities is one of those ways that we can sustain it, because you're educating a broad swath of the population, and that's very much important. So looking at the youth, and we're just about out of time, what do you see for the growth of your own association here in Washington, D.C., and your involvement with youth for the future, say over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, I certainly think we want to maintain the programs we have, and we want to expand them. I think we can do more in the entire state of Maryland. We're very strong in the counties around D.C., but we need to branch out. We're working hard to bring our work into Baltimore and having some success there, but we want to reach the entire state. And there are more schools and more people need to be involved. You know, as I mentioned, the issues that we face in this century are all global in nature, and we have to work cooperatively with other countries to achieve results. And where we don't, we have situations like Syria and Yemen, and so we need young people who can be truly global citizens. So I think the opportunities are unlimited. We need the finances, of course, to support the programs,
yes,
but and the volunteers.
And the volunteers.
Make it happen.
Well, this is Donald T. Bliss. He's Ambassador Retired, President and Member, Board of Directors, United Nations Association, the National Capital Region, as we create the Emerald Planet.